right now, at the date of recording, geez, this is gonna be a tricky start if I'm already stumbling like 14 seconds in. How far out are you from your next show?
So we are less than 3 weeks out from Charlotte Pro. So we plan on doing Charlotte Pro and then Pittsburgh after Charlotte. So
Wow.
yeah, and then maybe in between, I mean, we have to qualify this year for this Olympia. So that's the goal, obviously, after. So if we can do that before the end of May, that's super ideal. So we're just going to kind of go with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel a little silly introducing you on this podcast because if individuals follow Bikini even remotely, they already recognize your face, they already know who you are. But for listeners who don't, you guys, we are joined today with Ariana Brothers. Ari, thank you so much for doing this, especially given the fact you were 3 weeks out. You just competed at the Arnold. You did phenomenal. You looked incredible. I am so excited to watch you compete this season.
Thank you. No, that means so much. And thank you for just taking the time to just do this with me. I love being able to obviously share my experience as much as I can. And obviously, the fact that I can do this with you is amazing because I remember obviously hearing about your podcast and then watching it too. And it's crazy sometimes, like where this takes you and, like the networking that's involved. But I'm just super happy and just grateful and just thank you for all the kind words that you've said. And being at the Arnold was amazing, and I just couldn't have asked for like a better start to the year. So,
I appreciate it, and honestly, I think, what you're doing, and I'll just speak as a fan of yours and as someone who does follow your competitive journey, is like, you are not just someone who's getting on stage, and, just, like, performing your best and trying to continue to move up the ranks. You're also doing something that, as a competitor, I've competed for about 10 years, you're giving back to the community by offering so much education specifically around posing, and that's something I think there really there's a lot of, but in
yeah.
terms of what is high quality, that can be a little sparse nowadays. And as someone who posing does not come natural to me, I didn't do cheer, I didn't do dance growing up. It's like those tips and those little nuances that you're putting out in this short form content, super helpful for me, super helpful for, I'm sure, listeners. So thank you for that. You currently, are you coaching or is it predominantly just your posing service?
Yes, so it's just posing for now, and thank you for saying that, like, it I honestly, I just enjoy doing it, so I'm like, when I first started posing and just kinda getting into it, I was like, there's just so many little things to think about, and you're not able to pick up on everything right away, right? Like, I started off and I knew nothing. I mean, I'm still learning, obviously, still too, but if I can just help in any little way as far as just, like, the little things that maybe you don't think about when you're posing because there's so much to think about. I'm like, I enjoy making this content and just putting it out there because if this can make somebody 1 or 2% better, then like that's all I can ask for. Like this sport has given me so much and I've gotten so much help from so many individuals that it's just like if that's the least I can do, then I'd be happy to because honestly, it's just fun. Like I didn't realize how much I would enjoy helping with posing until I started. Really, I started the beginning, I think, of this year, mainly. Yeah. I think I launched my website like the end of last year, but nobody was really competing, the end of the year, stuff like that. So
Right.
it kind of picked up this year. And I don't know, I'm just happy to do it. And it gives me a sense of fulfillment because with posing, it's hard to sometimes feel very confident doing it, especially when you feel like maybe you're just not there yet, or maybe your routine doesn't look like somebody else's that you've been watching on Instagram or on the live streams and stuff like that. So, being able to instill a little bit of confidence in some of these ladies that maybe are second guessing themselves and they look great, like they're literally practicing so much and it's just like being able to be that person that's like their cheerleader and just being like no, like you're doing it perfectly, like that gives me so much happiness inside. Like it's just I don't know, that's really all I can ask for it, like I enjoy
Yeah.
doing it. So
That is so I mean, that's so refreshing to hear, and I can definitely relate to just seeing, like, that light bulb go off, with your clients, and for me, like, I've coached for a while, so seeing that within their nutrition or their training and being like, "Okay, like, you get it, like, we don't need to focus on these things that may be in the weeds, and maybe we do need to pay attention to down the line, but right now we do need to stick with just these fundamentals, and until these are nailed, we can't really progress," or, I mean, we can, but it's
Yes.
not going to offer that same return. And I think for me, last time I competed was 22, but in 21, that was the year I was like, I have got to get my posing together. Like this is just it's such a deficit compared to other aspects of, just like different domains within the sport of bodybuilding.
Mhm.
And for me, the hardest part initially was like getting comfortable posing in a full gym, posing in front of people, putting heels on, stripping like my shirt off and like being in a sports bra in that setting. And I tell clients, I'm like, if that's you, if the idea of that like makes you nervous, then like it's understandable. And it's a little bit of a paradox, I'm sure, for listeners. They're like, wait, but you get on stage
Right.
with a very small suit, but it's like, yeah, but in that day-to-day life, if that's uncomfortable for an individual, it's like just getting that exposure, getting comfortable, hitting these poses and knowing that like, yes, people are gonna stare and that's completely fine and
Yeah.
people can think like whatever they think. But for
Yeah.
me, that really helped. And then also drilling the routine and actually watching almost like watching tape as I was going through it so I could have those little I would say, like, more digestible corrections day to day rather than this, I don't know, very, like, bloated session that might be, like, an hour long where, yes, you can take a lot from it, but mentally, especially during prep, it can be so fatiguing.
Mhm. Yep, you're exactly right, and, like, the one thing that you mentioned was putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And the thing is, if you can step on stage or you have the goal of stepping on stage in front of people that you don't even know, and you're in like the tiniest of bikini on stage, it's like, now is the time to put yourself in those uncomfortable, situations. Because I like to tell my clients, I'm like, this is going to prepare you for the stage, putting your posing suit on maybe when you're at the gym, if you have, the area and the means to, and they accept it and stuff. But if you're able to do something like that, I encourage you to do it because you will feel so much more confident being on stage, knowing that you practice in areas where maybe you're uncomfortable, or, we're all used to practicing in a certain maybe room of our house or like a certain area. But if we just maybe go in a different part of our house, or maybe I'll have maybe my husband watch me this time around, so it kind of gives you a little bit of like uncomfortability because it's like, okay, I wasn't expecting that, like, but let's make things different because we don't know how the stage is going to be. We don't know maybe how the environment's going to be or what I'm going to be feeling that day or who's going to be in the crowd. I don't know, So it's like being able to put yourself in those situations and kind of experience it and feel it all before the stage. I think it helps a lot. I even had a couple of ladies they went to a seminar that we had in Charlotte last weekend. I think, yeah, you were there last year.
Yes,
Mike's,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, Mike's seminar. So we were there, and afterwards we'll do some posing and stuff like that. So I was like, if you ladies want, you can bring your posing suit and stuff. And so I was like, if you're comfortable, put it on afterwards. And I was super proud of them. They ended up putting their posing suits on. Not everybody did, but I'm like the fact that they had the courage to even just put their posing suit on in front of everybody at the end when everybody's posing in front of people that they don't know. I'm like, that says a lot. So doing that, I think, will definitely prepare you when stage time's here. So,
Absolutely. No, I love that, and I'm so glad you got to attend that. That seminar
yeah.
that Mike puts on, super helpful, and for listeners, who, let's say, are newer to competing and are just wanting to soak it all in, there are so many workshops that the NPC and IFBB put on, and oftentimes they will ask top competitors like Ari to come out, do demonstrations, do some talks. I've been to a few of them myself, so every now and again you'll get some female endocrinology info as well. We'll consider it light, but definitely encourage you to be on the lookout. And I mean, like follow pros, they're constantly posting about ones they're going to be putting on or attending, but it's a great way to get your feet wet. It's a great way to get feedback, which the other aspect within posing that I feel like many athletes, so many amateur athletes, or who are still like in that initial phase of designing that front pose, designing that routine, do you often find that people will go down the route of almost overcorrecting or even like correcting the wrong thing within a pose? And now they've just drilled this in as like, no, this is my front pose, even though from a technical standpoint, you're like, honey, like we got to adjust this. This is not going to translate the way you want it to on stage.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I mean, I will say, thankfully, every client that I've had so far has been very receptive as far as, if I point something out like, hey, maybe I think you're leaning a little bit too far forward, upper body wise in your front pose, and it can kind of just make you look a little bit less balanced. I haven't had anybody that has truly been like, no, like, this is how I like it, and I know it's going to look really good on stage. Thankfully, I haven't had that. Not to say it may happen at some point, but I feel for the most part, if you have an open mind in this sport, and not that I'm correct all the time or everybody else is either, but if you're at least receptive and you maybe play with it outside of maybe our session that we have, and then you're open to the fact of, well, let me try my way that I'm used to, and let me maybe see what she was saying and see if maybe this makes a difference. And if you can do that, I think you will have a very high level of success in this sport, because it's easy for us to always think that we're doing things correctly, even as a professional, right? Like, yeah, we just have it together. We know how to train, we know how to diet, we know how to pose. That's not always the case, like, not everybody's journey is literally exactly perfect, right? So, like, we're still learning, and there are things that maybe can be perfected as we continue our journey, especially on the pro stage. That's where those small little details come into play. And if I can at least maybe point those things out and present it in a way that, like, hey, your front pose looks amazing, but I know it can be better. So maybe let's try this for a second and let's see how this looks on you and compared to obviously what you do before. So I kind of like to present it that way, but everyone so far has been so receptive. And like I said, I feel like that's the biggest characteristic that you can have about yourself, is just being open and just learning from as many people as you can within this sport, because you will tend to find your own way or your own flow or your own personality within your routine, within your stage time, maybe your look that you have on stage, like everything. So if you can just take away from as many people as you can, I always like to encourage that.
I love that. And I think that's such a healthy mindset to have and a very humble mindset to have because you've seen, I mean, objectively, so much success in your competitive career and you've made vast improvements in your physique. And it's always fun as a pro to see other pros continue to evolve and be open minded to learning exactly like you're describing. And I think in a lot of cases, people can find that. There almost is this question like, okay, is what I'm doing optimal? Can I, find any is there anything that can give me that little bit of an edge? And I know with your career, so you have been at the Olympia twice. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Twice so
Twice?
far. So
Okay.
2023, 2024. Yes. So now we
Yes.
have to qualify for the third one. So
Okay, amazing. Yes, and I mean, truly, I am so stoked because like the improvements that I was looking at your stage pictures, your Olympia pictures from 23 to 24, and it's like there's vast improvements. Looking at you at the Arnold, again, vast improvements. And something that I find really impressive as a coach about your physique is that you're achieving a level of conditioning and a level of fullness and projection that isn't as linear or straightforward as I think a lot of competitors would imagine. And you've been in the sport. I mean, you turned pro in 2019. Is that right?
yes. Yep.
Okay, so you've been around and you know that like that look has evolved into something that, when Janet was Miss Olympia, like if that continued to be the look that they encouraged and they rewarded, like our physiques, both of our physiques would be going in a very
Yeah.
different direction right now.
Yes.
And we'd be
Right.
trying to match that look. Whereas, what they're aiming for right now, and I would say, with Laura Lee's physique and a lot of the physiques that are being rewarded, it's not just enough to be super conditioned. It's not just enough to be shredded. They want depth, they want fullness. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, what I find myself explaining to clients is like these athletes aren't coming in softer. It's not at a higher body fat. They have a level of density that is very elite in terms of muscular development. And that's something at the Arnold, I feel like it was just such a cool comparison to see that physique as opposed to the Olympia, because even that was like a continuous improvement from previous seasons. And I guess where I'm getting with this is what were the things that you and James, because for listeners, Ari's working and she's coached by James Aoki. Gosh, I know I butchered that.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
Team
I'm like,
Atlas.
I think you said it correctly. I don't think I've ever tried to say his last name.
I I'm gonna go Team Atlas. Team Atlas, if
Yes,
you're on
there we go.
Instagram, you know. And something I respect about James is he's very to the T, nothing gets missed.
Yes.
And I
No.
I can appreciate that being type A. But what
Yeah.
were the things that you collaborated on going into the Arnold that were like, hey, like obviously you have a gorgeous physique and you have the development, but those little nuances that, maybe at the amateur level we don't need to hyper focus on, but at your level, they can't be forgotten.
Yeah. So when I started working with James, I mean, initially I had to add a little bit more of my lower body back. So I had lost a little bit um, going into that year towards the end of the Olympia. I had lost some lower body development, and we were pretty much trying to focus on bringing back as much lower body quads and glutes as we could while still maintaining a good level of conditioning. So we ended up pretty much working my body up to eating a decent amount of calories without, pretty much extending my stomach, keeping my core tight, everything, together. And we made that the focus. So, how full can my glutes look without getting my tie-ins to be a little bit blurred? So I really appreciated his approach with how he went about doing things prior to the Olympia. And his goal was to end up competing at a show, which was Battle of the Bodies before the Olympia, because he wanted to make sure that we were on the right track, right? Like I came to him and we didn't have a ton of time before the Olympia to kind of change everything. So he's like, if we can get in front of the judges one last time before the Olympia, then I say we should do that. I think we only had like 5 weeks. So it was like grind time. So we were working right away. And thankfully we were able to win right before the Olympia. And I was already qualified. So it truly didn't I will say it truly mattered to me a ton because to me it felt like, okay, I was making the improvements that I needed, but it didn't matter as far as qualification is concerned. So, but that was one of the most significant shows that will always stick with me because it made me feel as if like I was bringing myself back. And I truly appreciated James for that because it felt as if for a while I was maybe like losing myself, or maybe this was just maybe a 1 year thing, right? Like it can obviously be like a mind game, sometimes if you feel like you're not presenting yourself in the best way possible or you're no longer progressing. So after when the Olympia came around, we ended up placing, I think it was 13th compared to the prior year, which we placed 7th. So obviously, it was hard to bring back that physique that I had the first year because we were trying to work on that lower body development. But James was also aware of it. So he was like, you know what? Let's apply for the Arnold and we're going to continue adding on this lower body muscle, but we're just going to have to keep working and pretty much just staying after it because you have pretty much everything else and your conditioning according to um, the judges at the Olympia, they said my conditioning was actually really good. I just needed lower body muscle, obviously. So, which we kind of expected. So, to me, that actually was really good feedback because in the 2023, I always had the feedback of being tighter, being more conditioned. So I'm like, okay, we missed on the lower body, right? But we brought in the conditioning, which was good. So to me, I was like, okay, that's good. At least we kind of know where my conditioning should be. And then now my main focus can just be lower body development and just kind of bringing that density and everything back if I can, and just maybe better this time around. So with James, it's funny because like you said, he is on every little detail. So when it comes to how, your makeup should be or your hair or suit colors, things like that, I appreciate him for that because sometimes it's like, I thought for the longest time that like maybe my makeup looked really good or whatever the case was. And he's like, no, I think it can be a little bit better, or maybe it will just flow with your physique or the colors of your suit a little bit better. So he would give me ideas. And thankfully, I will say that those opinions and his suggestions actually went a long way, because those are the things that you don't think about or you get used to. And you're like, no, but I love my look, right? But it's just like, you know what? Let me give it a chance and let me be open to this, because I mean, there's so many. Well, first off, James has been doing this for a long time, right? Like, a lot of times coaches, they've been in this for a very long time. They've watched a lot of shows. They've had a lot of competitors. So for the most part, they know what they're seeing, So I think being receptive to those little things, even if you feel comfortable and you maybe have won with a certain look before, like it's okay to still step out of that comfort zone, because you want to feel like you can trust your coach. You trust that individual that you are obviously working with. So that was one thing. And then another was also my posing. So in my head, I thought, my posing was not as bad as it used to be, right? Like it was better, but it wasn't like the best. So he was like, immediately, he's like, we need to work on your posing. And I'm like, really? I was like, is it that bad? And he's like, I mean, it can be a lot better. So I was like, okay. So we started working on my posing the same time that we started implementing everything else. So it felt so overwhelming, but it was exactly what I needed. I'm also very type A, and like I need to have structure. And if I don't sometimes, then I feel like I'm lost and I don't know what I'm doing. So we started working on my posing. I mean, like it was every single day I'd have to send posing videos, pictures. I mean, like being on top of every little detail. He'll say, your foot placement needs to be here or there, or your shoulder is slightly unaligned. And it's like those little things, it's like you don't think that they're going to be a big deal, but they are. When you're being compared to somebody else on stage who maybe has leveled shoulders in their back pose, and then yours are slightly off just because you have a little bit of an imbalance, then that can possibly be something that the judges notice. So those small details, to me, those are the things that I like to obviously present now to, clients that I work with, because you never know who's going to be beside of you on stage, whether it's NPC or IFBB. You don't know, and there may be a girl NPC level, first time ever competing, that is so highly prepared that you want to make sure you are on top of everything. So with James, he has literally helped me be able to focus and pinpoint every little thing about my physique that I can possibly get better. And the one thing that I do appreciate about him, with any show that we do and any progress that we make, is we'll have a show, and then it's just like the next day it's like, okay, now let's focus on like what we have to do next, which some may not like that. And I appreciate it, because it's like it's good to celebrate your win, or your success that you have, top 5, whatever it is. But then it's just like, what is the next thing that I have to work on? And I think it's more of like a competitor mindset, an athlete mindset. It's like, okay, we know we're not always perfect. So it's like, what's going to be my next step? Like that's the thing that I think keeps us going. And I think continuing to tell yourself, like, I'm going to continue to evolve, or I'm just going to continue to be better, and not staying complacent with where you are, I think you will be able to grow and make so many more improvements, because it's easy to feel as if like, I'm good, I got a win out of the way, or a qualification or whatever it is. So I'm good, I'm just going to bring the same physique. And it's like, no, like now you're going against some of the best of the best of the best. So now it's like every little detail matters at this point. So
I love that, and Ari, that was such a comprehensive and such a good breakdown for listeners, and I know I have a lot of clients who are like, "Hey, can you bring more pros on the podcast? Because I wanna hear what it's like inside their heads, like, what goes through their head as they're, between shows or as they're gearing up," because I'm sure it's not like, "Oh, like, should I stick to my diet?" I'm sure it's a little more advanced than that. And thank you. I think that opened up a lot of tabs for me, and something that you mentioned was really focusing on tightening up the things, and I guess I'll explain this, in a better way. Controlling what you can control. So the hair, makeup, suit, tan, just being organized with the schedule, like being on time for things and, making the travel as seamless as you can within within what's in your control. But then when we get into the physique and like you're seasoned, like you're a vet, so you know that like even if you do everything right and you have the peak and you have the plan and you and your coach are happy with the look, things can translate differently on stage. And that's where I love that you and your team are so focused on like, okay, let's not make silly mistakes. Let's not make like rookie mistakes or things that like very easily, if we just did them better, like, cool, this box is checked. Now, when it comes to the physique, and like you had kind of touched on this earlier with like you had lost a little bit of lower body in earlier years, like with different shows, and that was kind of dwindling down. So, I guess which direction do I wanna go? Sorry, I have a few questions I wanna ask. Um,
Yeah.
with this, it's like, okay, being able to accept there's gonna be some variability in how you present on stage, even if y'all follow the plan to a T. And also being able to recognize too, like, sometimes the judge's feedback, it might be, very direct and straightforward as like, "Oh, you need to be a little tighter." And oftentimes, this is what I heard from a lot of individuals who were getting that feedback, "Come in a little bit tighter. We want the tie-ins a little bit tighter." Maybe everywhere else is very balanced, but this was typically masking different kind of feedback, which still came down to more muscle, more depth, more projection, which I think now we're seeing a lot of that take place, and a lot of pros even get that feedback that like they might be very developed and historically have been on the upper end of glute development, but now they're being told, like, no, you need more projection because that in itself is going to allow for a tighter look, specifically around the tie in. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yes. No, it makes perfect sense.
I think like for individuals like for I guess for listeners, being able to parse through that feedback and understand that like there is a balance, yes, top to bottom, and there's a balance from a conditioning to muscularity standpoint, but there are very much times where individuals are told like, oh, you need to be tighter, yet what the solution might actually be is not necessarily them dieting longer, unless it quite literally is like top to bottom you need to be tighter. But if it's very specific to the glute tie-in, it might come down to they need more muscle and more projection.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And so with in the past, I feel like first off, I definitely did, I think, need a little bit more muscle development in my glute area in 2023. Even though I qualified for the Olympia, competed at the Olympia, did very well, I still feel as if like adding a little bit more to it will only help me be able to stand out compared to the top girls. Number one, because obviously they've been doing this a lot longer, they have more density to their glutes. I'm still kind of new in a way. So it's like I still have a lot more development. Also, that I'm taller. So I feel like sometimes it's like I have to, or tall girls in general, have to add just a tiny bit more just to make sure that they, I guess, so to speak, fill out their frame. I know people don't like to hear that, but just to fill out, your lengthy, legs and, arms, glutes, things like that that we have. And you don't realize that until you step on stage compared to, maybe somebody who's a little bit shorter than you and they have really great depth and you're like, what am I missing? Right? Like you can tell a difference because even though they're shorter than you and you're taller, sometimes it just takes a little bit more. Not saying that anybody who's short doesn't work as hard because they do. I mean, like, doesn't matter your height, you are putting in work regardless to even get any sort of dense muscle on stage. So, yes, adding a little bit more density to your glutes will only help your tie-ins pretty much come in a little bit more. And I think for me, I think that so after the Olympia, once my conditioning was good, the best it's been so far, and we just had to add a little bit more of that lower body muscle back. So going into the Arnold, my feedback was to be a little bit tighter, pretty much, I guess, all over, but primarily the tie-ins area. So I think, and obviously what we've been doing is obviously if we can just maybe shrink down, just maybe like a pound or two, maybe not much, but continue to work on that lower body development, glutes and lower body. I mean, I'm working glutes in my lower body so much right now that like I'm barely even touching my upper body at all. So yeah, so adding a little bit more of that density to your muscle will only allow them to come out and protrude pretty much the way that we want to on stage. So yeah, it'll help them project. And that's kind of exactly what we're doing now. So
I love that. And I think it's sometimes hard for individuals to reverse engineer that feedback or even like understand that like, hey, like if you just come in a little bit tighter, but you don't have that projection, this could theoretically cause a different kind of problem now. Now we could see too much detail in the hamstrings. Now we could see more adductor. Now if you're very upper body developed, we could see that there are striations or there are lines that, again, like lend towards creating a too conditioned look. So that's where I think like you and James have struck a really good balance, top to bottom. Which like I mean I'm picturing your physique right now. I'm like your clavicles are pretty broad. Like you don't have narrow
yes,
clavicles. So like
no,
that in itself, I myself, like I'm very I'm very
yeah,
clavicularly gifted.
yes,
So like
yeah,
from a
exactly.
delt standpoint, it's like yeah, like you do a set of laterals. Like I do a set
Yeah,
of laterals on a weekly basis, and it's like, okay, my measurements go up, and I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
okay, we don't need to do that.
can't
Um,
even touch them.
but it's like understanding that like, okay, putting the muscle in the right areas, is only going to get you closer to that front to back balance and then top to bottom balance, which I think oftentimes people just think bodybuilding, okay, we need to get leaner, bikini, like it's a very like petite and very soft and feminine look. So then they lean towards a look that isn't as muscular, which like the thing I've been saying for a while is like, yo, top pros are dense. Like they have density and they do get very conditioned, and that allows them to bring that kind of projection that if they weren't conditioned, it wouldn't present the same way. It wouldn't look as refined. So I think this like aspect of the conversation has been hopefully really helpful for listeners in understanding that like there is a balance to be achieved, and like part of that is just continuing to develop the muscularity in the right places. Now, when it comes to, I guess, really the dietary approaches and the training approaches that you've made with James as opposed to previous coaches, do you, I guess, can you tell me, are there any distinct differences that you've found have allowed you to unlock different levels to your physique or even just like subjectively in your overall well being, your enjoyment with these preps?
Yes. So that actually, and I can't believe I didn't mention it before, but that has actually been primarily the biggest component I will say is my training. So when I started working with James, I never truly knew, I guess, the level of intensity that maybe I should have been training at before. So he brought it to my attention by asking me to send him videos of pretty much my sets that I was doing for my exercises. And I did. And like I didn't realize it's not that it was awful, but it was awful, like he immediately was like, this you pretty much have like way more in you. Like you're not hitting failure right now and I need you to resend me your videos until it's good. Until I say it's good pretty much. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, yeah, so I definitely have my work cut out for me. Like I was training to the point where like I didn't know I had this level inside of me, and I think sometimes we think we get used to training a certain way and we don't realize that we're actually not training as intensely as we should be. And thankfully, I have my husband who is a bodybuilder, so he knows the level of intensity, but we haven't worked out together in like years, So he's here to help me. And James was like, if you like training with JD, please have him help you train because I need you to train this certain way. And JD and I started training together. And when I tell you that I didn't know that like training to that point was going to help my physique so much, but I think that's how I was able to obviously add on that muscle that I was lacking last year and within a shorter amount of time. And obviously, yes, you need that food to kind of go with it as well to obviously help build that muscle. But the training is pretty much going to be one of the biggest components and levels of foundation that will help you get that muscle that you need. And I think maybe that's what was pretty much holding me back a little bit. And now it's like I'm finally starting to see more changes in my physique than I was before, right? Like I kept chasing maybe this level of conditioning or chasing this and chasing that. And it was like, why do I feel like I'm not getting that? Well, sure enough, I wasn't training as hard as I should have been. You know, people think even as bikini competitors, it's like, oh, you may not need to train as hard. You know, it's just bikini, whatever. And it's like, no, like you still have to train super hard because these girls are obviously training extremely hard, show to show, and their physique shows it, you know? So having to compete against girls that are literally training so intensely, you have to make sure that you are pretty much right there too, and I'm just thankful that he brought that to my attention because training till failure is literally it's so bad, but it's good. It's good but bad. You know, it's like one of those things where it's like you have to appreciate it. So I think really fine tuning that my training and literally pushing myself more than I was before. I think that had helped me going into this Arnold, and thankfully we got the feedback saying that yes, your lower body muscle is back, and you know, we just have to be a little bit tighter. And I'm like, you know what, that's all I needed to hear because that's what we've been training and working so hard for, but you don't know until you step on stage, until you start to compare it to these other girls. Like, were these training sessions paying off? You know, I don't know until I get that feedback, until I look up or get on stage and I'm compared against these girls. Like, I am not going to know. So the whole time it's like you're training so much harder, you're literally dying, and you're just like, is this paying off? I don't know, you know. So literally training until you pretty much can't train anymore is the biggest piece of advice that I could give, because I thought I was doing everything correctly and I thought I was pushing myself, and I wasn't. And I think sometimes we actually have to take a step back and reevaluate, like, are we actually pushing ourselves to our best, or are we just being very comfortable and complacent with where we are, you know?
I love that so much, and it really jives well with, I would say, where I'm at in my journey as a competitor because truly, like the muscle that I have been seeking for forever now, I feel like I've been able to achieve at least a good chunk of it through modifying training intensity. And very similarly, training with my boyfriend, who he, by definition, is an expert in
Yeah.
biomechanics and training principles. So
Oh
it's
my
like
gosh. Yeah.
being able to have someone tell me, be like, hey, like, here is the level of intensity you're going to, and it's always, I appreciate it because it's always so constructive, but also like highlighting like, hey, like if we can push this a little bit more so that these rest days are required, like they're necessitated, that's a really good threshold to evaluate whether or not we're hitting like right on the cusp of training intensely enough. And I always say it, I had Stephanie Roth on. She's a figure pro, and she was like, I was talking about my glute development. She's like, I really need glute development. And I'm like, dude, like you have so many muscles that you have to build. If I had to build those muscles, I wouldn't have been able to build just specifically glutes. Like glutes and delts, like those are the two primary ones. And yes, like a little bit of detail in the lower body if you generally just don't have that development, or in the lats, sure. But it's like we have more specificity with the physiques. And you know what? That actually, I want to go back to the structure thing because I know we had talked about just with height, that being an asset and some considering that more of an asset or a detriment. And that's really where like one of the one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about that was like it's the same thing with tie-in length in the back pose. You have individuals with very short, very just like very small, compact, compressed tie-ins. And it's like, okay, this can very well be an asset in their front pose. It can create a lot of curvature, but depending on how the muscle is built around that, it can actually hinder the physique if overdeveloped or if not developed enough, and vice versa. With longer tie-ins, this can be something that really fills out a physique in the back pose, and it creates aesthetically like just a lot of visual that, you know, is just very balanced and appears very developed even with a lack of projection. But come front pose, that can be something that actually makes it harder and then requires the athlete to put on a little bit more glute meat or just have that nice S curvature and have their waist extremely tight. So I think that's for listeners. I just want that to be like the takeaways. Like, if you are taller, if you're shorter, there are benefits and challenges that you'll face depending on structure. And that's where I think it's so important to have someone be able to give you a very clear assessment on where you need to put the muscle on, areas that maybe we should be careful about, not necessarily avoid entirely. I mean, there are some I would say we should avoid entirely, but generally just helping understand like how do we present your structure structure and help continue to develop this out so that we don't create problems down the road, whether that be too much leg development, whether that be too much bicep or tricep development, which I mean, I'm sure like listeners have heard me say this before, is like when I program for individuals who want to emulate like a bikini look. I'm like, I'm not putting in biceps or triceps unless that individual is very much deficient. But it's like that in itself is going to create a need for potentially even more delts. Or for someone who's a little more compact, that might mean that now we have just like this overfilling of the physique in the upper body, or the appearance of being very upper body dominant. So kind of circling back, even though I just segued that, circling back to the training and the performance, I think that's incredible. And that's so, um, it's just so humble of you because you are very like you have a beautiful physique. You're very developed, you're very good at what you do, but to be able to keep an open mind and be like, okay, here is something that I'm doing well enough, but I know I can do better, and being open to that feedback from people you trust, James and your boyfriend, and having them involved in a way that allows you to continue to progress. I just think that's so important. And I know a lot of individuals will worry about muscle loss as they're going through these longer diets. And it's like, I say this all the time, like the best anti-catabolic, the thing that's going to help you prevent muscle loss is maintaining adequate intensity in your training. And it's oftentimes the first thing people will, pass off and be like, okay, well, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I don't have the fuel. So like, I'm just going to half-ass it. And it's like, no, that's the thing we have to protect, because regardless of where you are, if you want to keep that muscle in this state where you're very prone to lose it, that's the thing that's going to safeguard you.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. And honestly, it's like, even though, you may be in like an off season, or, you know, an off time after a prep or after a show, and you feel your intensity is just through the roof. It's just amazing. You're like, I can just train so hard. It's like when you're in prep, this is the time where it's probably going to hurt the most. It's going to end up hurting you physically and probably mentally a little bit too. Like, you are going to face probably more tired days and low energy days than ever before. But if you allow yourself to slack, which I've learned at this point, but if you allow yourself to slack on these days, then it's going to more than likely, you're going to think about it at the end, right? You're going to think about the fact of, well, those days probably should have mattered to me a little bit more, because I know that maybe I could have either done a little bit better, or maybe my glutes could have looked a little bit better if I didn't say, I don't have the intensity for today's session just because I'm low on energy or low on food, right? Like, you don't want to go through the rest of the year or the rest of your prep saying, like, what if I did that? What if I didn't, like, half-ass it in the gym, like when I knew I should have, like, those points will matter, and you will thank yourself later once you get through it. Because when you're able to push through situations and days like that that make it so mentally challenging, think about what you can accomplish further from here at this point. Like, if you're able to push through these days, like, personally feel that if you can overcome these points in prep, or even in your off season, then you can prepare yourself for a lot of things outside of bodybuilding and outside of prep. Like, it will overall make you a more productive human. And I feel that is the most beneficial thing that you can take away from this, and it will exude into the rest of your life. And whether it's business oriented, whether it's relationship oriented, like, there are so many things within that will just amplify your life. And I think sometimes it's not just about the training, right? There's more behind it, right? Like, you are tapping into a different level mentally and obviously physically too. But it's important, and I think I want to stress this a lot, because I knew that I lacked in this for a while, and I didn't realize how bad it was until I got called out on it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, can't believe I was just like playing around in the gym and I had no idea. So I'm grateful that it was brought to my attention. So if I can at least share that, yeah, I did well before, but I know I can do better by pushing myself more and staying on top of these levels of intensity that I didn't know existed, I know I will be a much better competitor moving forward. And that's all I can ask for. If there's something else later on down the road that I feel like will even make my physique even better, it's like I would be happy to share that too, because this is what is going to set you apart. And it's just a matter of doing it. It's going to be it may be hard, it may be a hard day, hard week, hard months. Everybody's prep's different. But if you can get through those days, then you will create a much better version of yourself.
I agree with that so much, and that really hits home. And I think a lot of listeners can, respect the fact that like getting to these levels of discomfort is probably going to be new. And even if you've done hard things in the past, it's just when you're faced with, what I describe it as, it's not even necessarily that the hunger is so bad. Like, yes, that's going to be transient and that's going to come and it is expected. So it's not something we necessarily should hide from or be alarmed when it does happen. But for me, it really is the fatigue and the discomfort that can be really heavy. And I think what's helped me in the last few preps I've done and in the current fat loss phase I'm in is really understanding the fact that like this is normal. This is what your body can do to tell you that it's overrun and that like you need a little bit more food or you need to take a break. And there's some degree of listening to that and accepting that like those feelings are present while still honoring the fact that like okay, this goal is going to require this to some extent. Like we do have to be okay with these feelings and we have to accept these sensations and experiences that come with getting to a body fat that arguably isn't healthy and isn't where our body wants to be. But I think it's amazing to see the development like in athletes, and I'm sure you can relate to this like in yourself as you've been able to tolerate more and more and tolerate aspects of competing that early on, if someone had laid it out like, oh, you're going to compete for this many weeks, so you're going to stay within this stage weight for X amount of the year, it's like that may have been overwhelming. And at a certain point may have been like, whoa, like, how am I going to do that? How am I going to, have what it takes to sustain this? But I think continuing to expose yourself to these feelings, not just ignoring them, I think is super helpful. And it gives you the opportunity to provide that evidence to yourself that you do have what it takes, you can tolerate it. And I think at your level, and I think for a lot of individuals who are like, hey, I'm looking to excel at the Olympia level, not just win shows, not just, have, add that to the list, but actually receive feedback, continue to get on stage even once the qualification is there. I think that does come very similar to like, national level competitors where there is an acceptance that these seasons might be longer than what we'd like them to be. I mean, yes, an aspect to competing is it's very enjoyable, but it does take away from other parts of your life. And I'm sure, it can get harder at times, but it seems like you have a really good balance around that, specifically with your business too. And I mean, like, I really think that there is a degree of understanding that, timing these shows strategically has to be thought out when you're knowing that, like, okay, the ultimate goal is to get on the Olympia stage. So that means, like, if we just compete the entire 2025, if we do every single show, I mean, like, there could be a negative cost to that. So, with mapping out this year, I mean, like we said this you said this at the beginning is like we've got Charlotte coming up, we got Pittsburgh. Those are going to be two really good shows to collect that feedback and get an idea of how they want this Ari to look post Arnold. And you'd kind of touched on this, like with being able to qualify sometime around May. If that does happen, which I'm sure it's going to, what would that look like between now and Olympia? Does that give you the time to like breathe, regroup, continue to refine?
Yes. So that's a good question. Yeah. So I guess I didn't really mention this, but so yeah, the goal is to hopefully qualify by the end of May. The reason why is because we definitely want to give myself just a little bit of a break right before competing for the Olympia again. So after last year's Olympia, it was kind of like we had to stay a little bit on and ready because I had applied for the Arnold. We didn't know, who's going to be accepted until, I think it was like a month or two after you applied. So you kind of have to stay in that point. And then from the announcement, it's kind of like, I think you had like 10 or 12 weeks, I think it was. So it's like you have to just stay ready pretty much. So yes, food was worked up a little bit, things like that, but it wasn't to the point of like a big break, I would say. So staying on until the Arnold and then obviously having to qualify this year, it's great because that way I can still kind of just continue rolling into this year and, just start off the season this way. But if we can at least stop it at the end of May, maybe even early June if we have to, then obviously we will. But giving myself, I feel like a physical break, and then obviously a little bit of a mental break, I think it's important because it will just help my progress, I feel like, going into the Olympia. I think it's important to always take care of yourself physically and mentally. You never want to feel like you have to prep the whole entire year because it can be very mentally draining. That's kind of what happened to me last year. And I wasn't planning to, right? So, especially if you have in your head that you're not planning to prep all year and it turns into all year, it can feel like a lot. It can feel exhausting. And I think sometimes the competitor or the athlete that's deep down inside is always just going to say, it's fine. I can do it. Like, I'll be all right. But you know that you need a little bit of a break. And I think it's important to always recognize those things because this is what is going to keep you going long term, right? Like, I think it's the worst thing that you can do for yourself is just to keep going because you will burn yourself out if you don't recognize those feelings and thoughts that you're having because you want to, especially if you want to stay in this sport long term, like it's important to take care of yourself. And I had planned last year to qualify, or no, I was already qualified, but I think I wanted to do Pittsburgh last year and then I wanted to take a break until the Olympia. Well, because I felt like I wasn't progressing, I was kind of regressing, then I was like, oh, I have to keep going because I don't want to end my season like this, not at my best. So I felt like I had something to prove, like I just knew I could be better than what I was presenting. And especially based off of my last year, that I'm like, I'm not going to stop until I can do it because I know this will make an impact for the Olympia. So I'm glad that I was able to. Was it a very long year? Yes. Was it worth it? It was worth it, I will say. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't recommend doing that just because I know how challenging it was, and that's why this year we had talked about taking a break right after the end of May, early June. So that way we can mentally be fully focused on the Olympia. And we may or may not do a show beforehand, but we just want to be ready and not tired and not drained at all and just have that full focus in. And I think that's important to kind of space them out, like you said, strategically, just to have that plan for yourself to know, okay, like I'm going to be planning around this. I hope it works out this way. If it doesn't, it's okay. We'll revisit this, but this is the plan because we have to still take care of ourselves. We still have to take care of things around us, our relationships, our day to day life. And we have to make sure that we make time for that as well. So,
I think that's a great explanation and really helpful for audience members to understand that it's very tempting and alluring to just be like, okay, I'm going to do all the shows. And for amateur competitors who are like trying to qualify and become pros, I'm going to do all the national shows. But realistically, you might be able to technically do it, but are you gonna look better for it? And I think
yeah.
that's where a lot of people, they can pigeonhole themselves into like, well, we picked this show, so I'm committed to doing it. And something that I've tried to work with my clients on, and I've worked myself, really is understanding that it can just be open-ended, with like tentative shows planned out, and it can be based on how the body's looking. It can be based on how you're feeling, and listeners probably know that I'm very big on having a set timeline and having this target rate of loss per week. And I think that's helpful, but it doesn't have to be strict. I think it can be helpful in the sense if we're falling behind, or if we're specifically trying to do, let's say for an amateur doing junior USAs, and we know that realistically at this rate of loss, we're not going to make it in time. We're going to be too far off. So even grinding, it's just going to be really tight. But when you actually look at the season, there are so many bikini pro shows. There's so many bikini pro shows. There's so many amateur shows as well, especially when we're talking about at the regional level and even at the national level. It's like we've got 2 to 3 months where you've got lots of opportunities to get in front of judges. And I think for myself, like I would recommend in the case that like you were going into this long season, just being really honest and communicative with your coach, but also with yourself around like, how are you doing? Like, how are you handling the fatigue that you're experiencing? And there's no shame in saying, like, well, I committed to this show, but I think I'm actually going to look better if I push it off or I do a show 2 to 4 to 6 weeks later. I think that's okay to the extent that you're not just doing that the entire year, because even that can be so mentally draining.
No, you're absolutely right. And like you said, being realistic with yourself. Like, if you are not ready by a certain show, that's okay. Like, there will be plenty more shows the rest of the year. And it's important. And I know everyone always says, the stage is always going to be there, stage is going to, but it actually is very true. Like, there will be so many shows that it's important to make sure you are ready and you are on, not only physically, but mentally, because you are going to thank yourself later. If you look back and you're like, "Oh man, I did rush it and I thought I could be ready in time, but like maybe I could have, lost a couple of more pounds and I would have looked better, or maybe worked on my posing a little bit longer, I would have looked better." You will look back and you will be like, why didn't I just take the time? And I think that that's important to recognize, because you want to make sure you're putting so much time, effort, money into this. You want to make this your best that you can bring. And you want to look back and be like, I'm so happy that I brought that package to the stage because I took my time. They say enjoy the process, enjoy the whole journey of it. And it's true. You have to enjoy it, because you want to look back and say, I did everything I could to bring this physique to the stage.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, with the direction that the NPC, the IFB is going, like now we do have another division that individuals who are wanting to dip their toe into and just, get a feel for the sport, they have that opportunity without necessarily having to commit to spending several years in a build or, dieting down if, let's say, they're starting at a higher body fat. With the fit model division, I think that there is opportunity for individuals to experience the sport at, let's say a lower frequency and then decide, am I ready to make that commitment where this is going to be, a longer journey. And Ari, this has been incredible. I'm so happy that we could have this conversation. I hope this was helpful for listeners. And thank you so much for showing up with this kind of energy, this kind of presence, especially with where you're at. You look incredible. I'm so excited to see you grace the stage and that Olympia qualification. By the time that this comes out, I think you're going to be qualified in hopefully cruising out of, that fat loss phase or that prep phase. But if listeners want to check out your content, which I highly recommend, or if they want to hire you for posing, which I also recommend, where can they find you?
So you can find me on Instagram, Ari_IFBB Pro, and Arise Posing as well. So I am on both of those. You can find me there.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. You guys, thank you for listening. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.